Hello and welcome to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on the show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. This podcast is sponsored by SyncBack Pro, the professional photographer's tool to keep your images safe. How safe are your photographs? Or to put it this way, how would you feel if you permanently lost some or even all of them? The fact is, there are very real risks in storing your digital images on a hard drive, even if they're backed up to an external device. There's ransomware, hardware failure, file corruption, virus infection, and even accidental deletion or destruction. SyncBack Pro makes this problem go away permanently. SyncBack Pro is the professional photographer's tool to back up photographs, images, documents, and data files. Once set up, it keeps your files safe, quietly and reliably in the background. So if problems occur or disaster strikes, you'll have nothing to worry about. Your photographs will be safe. Which is why it's also the backup solution that I use myself for my own photographs. Take advantage of an exclusive 25% discount today by going to www.backup.sg. The software will never expire, meaning your photographs are safe forever. That's www.backup.sg. Give your photographs the protection they deserve. And now, on with the show. Born in New Zealand to a Dutch boat builder and American Nun, Paul Hoelen has managed to put his 4 passports to good use. After much exploring, he eventually chose to base himself in the beautiful wild island of Tasmania in 1998. Paul has won numerous accolades and awards for his imagery, both nationally and internationally, including 3 times winner of the AIPP Tasmanian Professional Photographer of the Year, 6 times AIPP Tasmanian Landscape Photographer of the Year, and 2 times Overseas Photographer of the Year in New Zealand. On an industry level, he's been awarded AIPP Master of Photography and a fellowship of the NZIPP. He judges regularly at a state, national and international level and writes regularly for several magazines. He's also an industry ambassador for Asukabook in Australia and New Zealand, and his fine artwork is represented by One Fine Print and the Source Photographica Galleries in Melbourne and Aspen USA. He is also a proud member of the exciting and progressive fine art landscape collaborative, The Light Collective. When not travelling for his destination-based projects, his work is based in Hobart. He works commercially with many Tasmanian-based hotels, businesses, and shoots a range of events, captures boutique weddings and unique natural light portraiture, and continues to build his collection of unique fine art landscapes. We discuss the landscape photography culture in Tasmania, the contradictions of conservation and social media exposure of wilderness areas, along with much, much more. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day, Paul. Welcome to the Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
Well, it's a magnificent day in Tasmania. You wouldn't know what season it is, summer, autumn, winter. It's just one of those blue sky perfect days. I've got my new electric mountain bike charge ready to go out the door as soon as this is finished, Grant, actually, so I can
Fantastic. All right.
get out on the trails.
I don't want to keep you from getting out on the trails, but really excited to have you with me today. You've been on my list for a little while, and it's great to get you on board. Why don't we start with, and I don't want to go too far back in history, but why don't we start with what got you started in photography and in particular landscape photography?
Yeah, that is going back a fair way, Grant. I was a late bloomer in some ways, but at the same time, I've probably been shooting for about 30 years. So 25, probably a little bit more considerate, really. The first 5 years, I was doing a lot of exploratory trips and solo trips and sort of semi-mountaineering in New Zealand and the South Island in particular. I was studying down in Dunedin at Otago University, and they have really prolific tramping clubs and different groups that go on a lot of adventures. I was doing a bit of big wave surfing in those days, so I was really going a lot of remote places and having these incredible adventures. And I guess my motivation initially was quite selfish. It was, I just want to relive that, or I just want to take myself back there, or I just somehow this moment's so special. I don't want it to be gone. And so I was almost like grabbing onto these moments where I wanted to have them with me forever. And a few years later, I just started realizing that, geez, not so many people are experiencing what I'm experiencing, and just how special and moving and evocative and transformative and even healing it can be, spending time in wild places and all these adventures. So I became a little bit more excited about sharing it, and that sort of then evolved a little bit further, and totally self-taught, no training. I just slowly just figured things out on my own in film days. It took me a long time before I had my own camera. I borrowed probably 4 or 5 cameras and lost probably 3 of them to the point where I realized I can't borrow anybody else's, or somebody's going to shoot me. So I think I got a loan from my mum and bought like a EOS 50, I think it was.
Right.
I had quite a lot of. I had an EOS Mu before that. No, a Olympus Mu, little point tube one that just fit in my pocket and went everywhere.
Yeah,
Pretty
yeah.
good little film camera. And then the 50 was probably my first more serious camera. And then I moved to, as I got more serious into it, I bought an EOS 3, which was the close to flagship Canon. And it actually had this inbuilt eye-controlled autofocus, which for some
Yeah.
reason they haven't brought out until the R3, maybe
Yeah,
20
they
years
took
later.
it away through most of the most of the D series, didn't they?
Yeah, for about 20 years it disappeared. So I've been a Canon shooter most of my life. I have tried lots of different styles and types of cameras, and I personally see a camera as a box that collects light, and everything that makes a photograph great is the vision, the relationship, the timing, the compositional skills, the understanding of light, which has nothing to do with the camera. That being said, they're getting a little clever these days. So from there, I moved into a career in wilderness adventure therapy. So
Okay.
that was 25 years ago. I started that in Tasmania when I moved to Australia. I fell in love and followed a girl. That's how I ended up over here.
Mhm.
And we had 5 special years together in Tassie, and I fell in love with Tasmania. Never heard of the place, but goodness me, it's a magnificent place to call home. And that's saying something when you're coming from New Zealand.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I was out there shooting the landscapes and working out on country, doing sort of week-long remote area trips, all sorts of places, big snow alpine trails. And we did a lot of caving, abseiling, climbing, bushwalking, sea kayaking in remote areas. But we're working with recovering addicts and street kids and single mums and Aboriginal families and people with physical challenges. And the idea was to use the wilderness as a therapeutic medium.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think landscape photographers all in their own way have their own kind of more deeper personal relationship with why and how they're so drawn to spend time in beautiful natural wild places. I think it's very balancing. It
Yep.
really gets your perspective back in order. The kind of things we get caught up in our day-to-day lives these days, you realize when you're out there, it doesn't really matter that much. So it's a good realign, and it can be very, very healing for people that haven't spent time out there, that find a
Yeah.
lot of peace and space and opportunity to reflect, and connecting with the natural world through, millennia and all sorts of cultures has been a part of healthy management of well-being.
Mm, mm.
And so being a little bit more conscious of that, and just being out there shooting landscape photographs for the love as part of the experience, I slowly started weaving moments with people in landscape,
Okay.
and I realized soon after that a lot of the connection that they made, the really powerful, beautiful moments that they experienced out in these wild places, were a photograph could bring you back to them. It could anchor those experiences deeper. It could, in a moment when they got back and things got rough again, which it often was for a lot of the clients I work with, they could relive the experience. They can almost take themselves back there
Mm.
and find that peace again and find that sense of connection with a wild place. And a photographer's always had that capacity to do that. To me, it's like a window with a frame, and you can
Yep.
grab the frame with your hands and shove your head straight back into that moment and feel what you were feeling, and the smells and the colors and the sounds, and you can relive it. And it's a moment you can always reach back into. And for people whose lives, aren't particularly great, relative to my pretty blissful one, it's a real gift to do that. And I became more and more conscious and actually started weaving photography into the therapeutic design of the program, to the point where in the last decade or more, photography became a huge part of the programs.
Mm.
And we had people that couldn't necessarily read or write, and some even that couldn't even speak. And so I sort of became the voice of their experience to the people around them, or
Yeah.
the people that love them, that couldn't understand what was so transformative about this experience in a wild place. And so it also, not only did it just reach them back into those places, it helped redefine their relationship with the world they live in, and also how they saw themselves and
Yeah.
how other people saw them, because they were often overcoming fears and taking on challenges that no one thought they were capable of doing. Well, here's the evidence. Here I am going over a cliff, or pushing past my fear of the water and the ocean, or going through a tiny hole in the ground in a deep cave that
Yeah.
would scare most people. And it is this tangible, undeniable evidence. And just wild places are just so powerful. And I've fallen in love with Tasmania. It has one of the largest, most well protected land masses of wilderness in the world. I think it's like 33% world heritage, and maybe 45, 50 of that is pretty well protected. And it's essential for my well-being, and so landscape photography is my vehicle, or my excuse, as it were, to kind of go to church, as it were. And that if I have a church at all, it's the wilderness.
Yeah. Fantastic. So, what is it that about that, I guess, that you're trying to express in terms of art? So, taking it from, yes, that experience and sharing that experience, is that the end goal in creating the art, or is it more about creating a beautiful image?
I mean, there's personal reasons and there's professional reasons. It gets a
Sure.
little, I think it's a little different. If you're working purely as an artist, it's a little bit different if you're working also like I am as a working professional as well. From a personal point of view, it's my reason for getting out there,
Yeah.
often, and it's a tool for connecting. Like I notice things that I just walk past otherwise, if I'm not in the space of reaching and surrendering and opening to the creation of images. And my process is a little bit that way. I'm not very pre-visualized or tied into outcomes with my photography. I'll research a place. I'll get
Hmm.
there in the right season, the right time of day, the right light, and with the right gear. But once I'm out there, I'm just kind of surrendering and almost allowing what nature's voice, as it were, wants to come through. And I'm saying, I'm here, I'm ready. What would you like to dance with? Where would you like me to play? How would you like me to be your voice, I guess? And that sounds a little bit altruistic, but from a very practical point of view, I spent at least 20 years being seriously involved with conservation organizations. So,
Yeah.
and I think, there's almost like a spiritual aspect to it, I guess. Like, I think after about a decade or 15 years, I asked people, well, what do you see in my work, or what defines my style, which is a really hard thing to do when you're just working it out yourself, and you can't really
Yep.
be objective. And people would say they just felt there was an element of spirituality in my work. And
Oh.
how do you define that? How can you put that in words? I don't know. But, I use that word church, and I'm a non-religious person, but I think I'm probably a spiritual person in that I feel like spirituality is a very important part of well-being, and I feel most at peace and most connected with both myself and the world when I'm in a wild place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I take the time to create that relationship and foster and nurture that relationship with the wild places myself, it then starts sort of weaving through the imagery somehow, or somehow
Mm.
osmotically drawing in, because that's the way I'm seeing and how I'm feeling and what I'm open to in terms of what the landscape has to present to me. And so it's a bit of a intuitive kind of process for me. And I'm a very feeling based sort of person. So
Yeah. Right.
so I'm looking for feeling in my images, I guess. And I tend to, the more established and experienced I get with the technical side of photography, it becomes less and less about that and more about story and feeling and narrative and emotion. And I think, if you're going to be successful and purposeful with, say, conservation based images, you've got to touch people somehow. You've got to
Yeah.
find a chord that somehow resonates, or just inspires people to deeply connect with a place they might not otherwise know, because there's some quality in there that's coming through that just sort of transcends the mind and just reaches someplace in you that is just deeper and beyond. And have I done that? I don't know. Is that an intention? I'd say yes. Do I feel like there's an exact process to do that? No. But it's certainly a purpose, and I guess something I'm present to more and more. And I think to do that well, you've got to be pretty on top of yourself as well. If you're not in a good headspace or you're caught up in your mind, you're not going to really create those kind of images anyway.
Yeah,
So
totally.
I try and leave a fair bit of space around my process. So by the time I get there, I'm very present. And
Mm.
that actually involves a bit of work on yourself, actually,
Yep.
reining in the mind and getting on top of the things in your life that might be taking you out of balance. And I also realized that one of the ways that I stay in balance is to head out there. And so photography is just a tool for me. I could write, I could dance, I could sing. There's a lot of different mediums that I feel like
Sure.
could be a great vehicle for creative expression that also have the same capacity. So I'm not super tied to photography as a be all end all.
Yep.
That being said, I just live and breathe it. And as far as I can tell, I probably will till the day I die.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about using photography for a tool for environmental education and advocacy. How do you see that role for photographers, landscape photographers in general, playing in promoting those conservation efforts?
I mean, there's so much history there already, and there's so many wonderful photographers that have gone well before us. Right back from the first national parks and Yosemite, hundreds of years ago. But I feel like I really got exposed to that here in Tasmania.
Yeah.
There is an incredible lineage of landscape photography being used for conservation purpose very intentionally for generations here. And as much as I was aware of that in New Zealand, I literally met those people. I literally had, like Grant Dixon was in my house 15 minutes ago,
Yeah.
Yeah, and Rob Blakers lives just around the corner from my house. Chris Bell's just up the hill.
Yeah.
And they were kind of mentorees of a sort under Peter Dravoskis and Olagus Trihanis. And it
Yeah.
goes back further than that. So Tasmania has a very strong, very actuated lineage of people that have dedicated huge amounts of their time and their craft as landscape photographers to conservation and to great effect. And even though Peter Dravoskis wasn't inherently a conservationist at heart, arguably his imagery has been some of the most powerful imagery in modern history, certainly in Australian history, for that effect.
Mm.
And so there's a really strong culture around that still. So I've woven there's different ways to dance. Grant, you can
Yep.
inspire people through beauty. You can educate people by searching out new and rare and endangered species and that few things have been photographed. But you can also challenge people.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a relevant tool in the arsenal of how to operate as a not necessarily successful, but as an impactful photographer. And it's a fine line. So I've done a lot of work with Bob Brown and the Bob Brown Foundation for 20 years. I'm heading out next week, the week after, on the Art for Takana project, and just put in some images for an exhibition yesterday morning where we're directly using art as a tool for conservation. And that's art with a huge range of mediums. And that's been very successful and very positivist. It's not like, reaping, just photos of destruction. It's not over polarizing. Beauty and art as a way of connecting with people that's very universally accessible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it always has and will be. I think it transcends politics and your everyday kind of media. It just reaches something primal in our beings that we can all kind of relate to somehow.
Mm.
So art is a powerful medium and always will be. And yet I also co-created a group called the Light Collective, and
Yep.
I've got a bunch of photographers together who were really some of the best upcoming guys in Australia, their craft: Adam Williams, Ricardo de Cunha, Luke Austin, Ignacio Palacios. And we spent half a year kind of deliberating about what directions we want to go in and what kind of values were going to keep us together. And we slowly realized that a high conservation focus was going to be a great rally point to give us sort of purpose and drive and motivation to take on bigger projects.
Yeah, right.
So the second to last project we did was the Great Barrier Reef. And here's an example where we chose to use that element of challenge a little bit more as well. So the first project we did was on Kaditanda Lake Eyre, and that's a very remote, powerful place that's quite mystical to us, but it's also being threatened by the water tables drying up from all the unlimited mining access, and all the springs and waterways in the area are starting to dry up, and the Aboriginal people are struggling to walk their land anymore because there's no water. And
Yep.
that's a very subtle, untold story. And we used really beauty as the main tool, I guess, in the conversation there to engage people, to inspire people with conserving that landscape. But the second project, we realized, well, the Great Barrier Reef has been photographed for 100, 150 years. What could we do that hasn't already been done well, and even better than we could do? And at the time, there was huge conversations in Queensland about, building the world's biggest coal mine.
Yeah, the coal ports and
coal ports, and it was very present and very topical. And we're like, okay.
And massive coral bleaching events. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of bleaching going on, and they were looking at sending 500 ships of cheap grade coal to India to burn for electricity, which is, the most destructive form of electricity production in the world. And so we're like, well, are we actually serving a greater purpose by just taking pretty pictures of what's left of the Great Barrier Reef? And we decided that no, we're not using our voice to the capacity that we could. So we changed the project from blue to black and blue.
Right.
And we titled it Black and Blue Coal or Coral. And we created this really powerful juxtaposition of the Queensland coal mining industry and the Great Barrier Reef, and elements of the reef that were both healthy and elements that were actually, degrading and falling away through bleaching. Because the cycle of conservation, even though coal isn't directly responsible for that, it does really successfully symbolize the forces that are. So the burning of fossil fuels and the rising sea temperatures as a result is what's killing the reefs. So we didn't point any fingers, we didn't name any names, we didn't say where anything was. And we used quite abstract work to make the work quite accessible and not too polarizing. Because if you go too far, you're not going to reach the kind of, the audience that counts.
Yeah, eyes closed, ears closed. Yeah,
you want to reach the middle audience, I guess. The undecided ones that, is climate change for real? Do I need to be more proactive about, who I support politically, or, where I spend my money with ethical organizations? That's where the great change needs to happen.
Yeah.
And if you're overly polarized, then you lose access to that audience straight away. So, but that was our first kind of like, well, let's use the element of challenge as well in that conversation as photographers. And that juxtaposition creates this disharmony that you can't really sit with them side by side with ease. You kind of need to fall down the fence one side or the other, and then ask some questions as to why you're there and how you feel, and what role or conscious kind of lifestyle do you want to have relative to this conversation, which, there's a huge ICC report released actually last night, Grant, that's not looking pretty. And I guess we decided collectively that we're not serving the world by sitting on the fence and just not making a stand. There's always a risk when you take a stand as an artist, but there's also potential power and change that comes from it. So our current project is the Tarkine. And the Tarkine is an area in the far northwest of Tasmania. It's the largest temperate rainforest in the southern hemisphere of the world. It has arguably some of the greatest volume of documented sacred Aboriginal sites that exist in the world. And it has 60 semi-endangered species. It has 7 out of 10 criteria for World Heritage listing. And there's only 2 places on planet Earth that have that level of breadth, and you only need 1 to be a World Heritage listed site. So, and this is totally unprotected largely, and it's 95% covered in mining and logging leases. So for about 15, 20 years, I've used photography as a tool to, in books and exhibitions and films, and, to engage people and educate them to the significance of what it represents, to invite them or inspire them to come and connect with it themselves, to be a part of books that actually give people the tools and maps and sites to be empowered to go there, because it is a wild place, and
Yep.
to people that don't know. I've also done quite a few projects with the Indigenous people and their relationship with country
Mm.
and being their voice, photographically and otherwise, and did a beautiful film last year as well to that effect.
Fantastic.
So yeah, long conversation there, but it's a huge part of my life, Graham, and I'm quite unashamed at this time in my career now, particularly with the way the world's heading, that we all as landscape photographers have the capacity to be part of this conversation. And I think we already are, because just any moment where somebody stops and slows down and has a moment of appreciation for what exists and the natural balance of how things, have been, can be, and hopefully will be is a beautiful thing. And it should never be underestimated. And I think we all do that innately just through what we do, whether we're conscious of it or not. But I also feel like it is a time in the Earth's history when we all can have a greater capacity and role and purposefulness in terms of how we operate in the world as landscape photographers.
Definitely, definitely. I got a couple of questions based on some of what you were just talking about. How do you balance the desire to capture an amazing image with the need to respect and minimize your impact on the natural environment? You see a lot of places, and I know you've talked about it on your YouTube channel with Nick Monk and Luke Sharkey. There's places which are being degraded by the volume of people that are turning up because they've seen it geotagged on Instagram or whatever. How does a photographer go about getting that amazing image in that incredible environment and yet minimize their impact and the impact of their followers?
Yeah, it's an important conversation, Grant. We've had that many times. Even before we started the show, we were very conscious that here we are with this vehicle of, revealing places to the world, and what's and we're all all of us are quite connected with conservation. Yep. And quite actively involved. Nick has been for decades, and Luke as well. In fact, Luke's was on the last Light Collective project on the Tarkine and still will be, for instance, and for Takina as well. So for the show, for instance, in terms of just to give the overall principle, we were very clear that we wouldn't reveal places that didn't have solid infrastructure already there, that wouldn't be that wouldn't have particular impact levels.
Yep.
If we do personally show photos of certain areas, I personally will never say where they are. And I might just say West Coast Tasmania, a bit as far as I'd go.
Yeah.
I think, if you are in an area that has certain sensitivities, then using that as an opportunity to educate people about what those sensitivities are. This is a place where you don't want to walk on these plants, or this season of the year, this is very susceptible, or this is very fire prone, so be careful here. So you can actually use it as a platform to educate on some level as well. And there'll be some of the principles that we use to apply, and that applies both on the show and on the social media. And it's a fine line, loving to death. It's a conversation we'll be continuing to have. It's not going to disappear, that conversation. If anything, it's probably going to intensify as the wild places get less and less and more overrun. But I think, being respectful and sensitive and aware and understanding of impacts is really important. And I think there's been some mistakes by, young and new photographers or people that were more interested in followers than sustainability. There's a little place literally just around the corner from my house, this beautiful little falls.
Yeah.
It's called Secret Falls, and that basically got destroyed in months after it was revealed. It was such a sensitive place, and it was really sad, and it was a very direct, immediate, and very clear impact from social media. So it is an ongoing conversation and an important one, Grant. I'm glad you brought it up, and I think all landscape photographers should take some time to be present to where their line is and how they're being responsible to the landscape that they're getting so much from. To me, I get so much from wild places. I'm always feeling like, well, how can I get back? How can I keep that conversation with the landscape as a two-way street? I'm getting so much joy and balance and perspective and health and well-being from this. how can I give back,
Yeah.
or at the very least do what I can to protect the places that have been offering so much of it to me.
Yeah, I think that's a really great perspective, Paul. Where you're looking at what you're getting out of it, and taking that time to think about how you can give back. I guess the other question that came to mind when you were talking before, you were talking about working in indigenous and sacred lands. Um, what sort of do you see are the ethical considerations that landscape photographers need to keep in mind when they're approaching those subjects? Obviously you've got to respect the locals' desire to keep a sacred place sacred, and how do you deal with those sort of situations? So if you're going into a wilderness area where the local indigenous population has sacred areas, do you get in contact with them beforehand, or do you just sort of blindly go off in the bush and hope for the best?
Well, that last word is the most significant, Grant, blind. So my point being, a lot of people actually have no idea, and they haven't made
Yeah.
the effort to even
And
find out.
that's why I'm asking the question.
And
So many people have no idea that the places they're going are sacred or not.
and so that's a step quite a few. There's quite a few steps further back, Grant, to actually realize, wait a minute, I haven't been here before. Who are the land management's, trusts, particularly in a lot of places in mainland Australia? You
Yep.
can actually you can get pretty clear and accessible information about that if you choose to take the time and energy and show the respect to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of people, they're not educated enough to understand that they're there, or it's easier to ask for forgiveness and permission, or
Yep.
it's far too much work and they don't want to risk not being able to go, so they'll just turn a blind eye. And I don't think everyone does that necessarily deliberately, but there's certainly ethical considerations there about who you are as a person,
Mm.
and it's also reflective of your own relationship with country. And it's interesting that, not being from here, they use that word here, on country, and I'm learning more and more and more that it's a very, very powerful, multi-layered kind of level of meaning around what that means. Like, the Indigenous people, landscape and community are completely interwoven. They're utterly almost one unit, and our culture doesn't live that way.
Yeah.
We dominate nature, we use it as a resource, and we prop up our lifestyles at whatever it takes, at whatever cost, arguably. And that is not anything aligned with traditional practices for sustainable cultures through the whole of history.
Mm.
And so it's not really woven into our culture. So you actually have to make a very considered effort to look in and around and beyond our own culture, and that's sort of not something that is necessarily taught to us in schools, or it's part of our education. And so it's quite a big conversation. So, me personally, like, there's even places that are inappropriate to shoot from the air. There are places that are just for women's business or men's business, and
Yep.
and there's really powerful places like in the Kimberley, for instance, where it's almost like the land is so powerful, it'll let you know if you're not meant to be there.
Yeah.
And something might even happen to you if you don't respect it. Like, I've seen and witnessed stories about that myself. So here it's sort of, I actually spent 20 years building up a relationship with the Indigenous community, and I've offered my services photographically to them for decades, for basically for free, on a Western sort of point of view,
Yep.
just out of respect to that it's their country and their land, and I'm here walking it, and I'm living a lifestyle that benefits from the beauty and wonder of the landscape here. And that traditional custodians, not me. I'm not from here. I'm from somewhere else. I've been here almost 25 years, and I do spend a lot of time doing what I can to relate and protect, and I walk country very respectfully.
Mm.
Um, but at the same time, I won't say it's not my country, because I live here and I made it my home, and I don't want to separate myself from my own relationship with the country, which is also valid and respectful. But I do give overriding nod to them, and it's gotten to a point now where I've built up enough trust in the community that they're happy to use me as their voice.
Mm.
And I get invited on projects where they're asking me to record country and their relationship with country, to then create platforms and books and films that will then speak on their behalf. So was it last year? Year before, Bob Brown sponsored me to take two Aboriginal elders out onto the very, very remote west coast of Tasmania.
Yep.
A place where you can only probably get to with, 4 to 8 days bushwalking there and back.
Yeah, yeah.
And we went there to create a documentary with the elders, to educate people as to the significance of their relationship with country. And that west coast of Tasmania, you cannot walk 10 meters without coming across a midden, a living site, a tool site, a hut depression, a seal hide. It is just living, breathing culture, just everywhere you look for hundreds of kilometers. It's the most visibly accessible access to that culture that exists in Australia. And it's been destroyed by recreational four-wheel drivers. They just go, there's nothing out there. They're just going up there to draw and have a good time.
They're blind to it. They don't see it for what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's not necessarily anybody's fault because they literally don't know.
Yeah.
They've just never been raised. No one's taught them in school. The community's not aware of it.
They don't know what to look for.
And so, yeah, and the middens actually become the targets for their driving because they give more grip for their tires.
Yeah.
The sand. And, you'll walk through middens that are like, 25 feet deep and the roads cut through the heart of the middle of them. And you're looking at tens of thousands of years of history just all around you. And
that's right. Yeah.
And so that became a tool in the campaign for the Indigenous people's choice to create an injunction to stop recreational four-wheel drivers just going into those really super remote, very sensitive areas. They parks actually opened up other areas deliberately to allow them other places and alternatives. And so it was very interesting being there and watching illegal four-wheel drive happening while we have Aboriginal elders there and literally interviewing them while they're up on the dunes behind and being witness to the conversations when they waved some of them down and started having these kind of educational style conversations with just, hey, do you realize what's around you, and showing them tools and showing them things is super powerful. And also, they don't necessarily, a lot of those living sites that we found had only been recently revealed by huge dunes that have washed inland and revealed just, ancient middens. And you could see like the size of the shellfish was like 2.5 times anything that exists today.
Yeah.
That was like, it was really fascinating just from a practical kind of evolutionary point of view of seeing how much that had changed as well. So I've been involved and will be a lot. And that goes around. So I opened an amazing exhibition in a very different route I'll talk about later. But I actually when I was opening the exhibition, I got a knock on the door from Craig Everett, who's one of the great custodians for Tasmanian Aboriginal culture, and he asked me if he could come and do a full dress regalia opening, smoking ceremony, and opening for my exhibition.
Fantastic.
And I'm like, when does that happen? When the Indigenous people here are asking you? I was like, are you kidding me? And we had the current premier in Tasmania. We had hundreds of people, and it was a super powerful way to use both the photography I was doing and its relationship with landscape, and people's relationship with landscape, and also Indigenous culture, because they're one and the same to them, and that's not a concept that it's easy for us to take on board.
Yeah. I want to shift a little bit the conversation towards some of your own work around your choices in terms of making photography a career as opposed to just a hobby. When did that happen for you, and what was that decision process like?
I feel like the universe was knocking on my door saying, hello, buddy, this is what you're meant to be doing, and I wasn't listening for quite a while. This is probably more in the early 2000s maybe, and then I got to a point where I just broke my wrist, I just busted my ankle as well. I think I was on a wilderness therapy trip and had an accident, and I was snowboarding somewhere in New Zealand and had an accident, and all of a sudden I couldn't do anything and I couldn't do my jobs anymore. But I could still take a photo.
Yeah.
I had maybe half a year of time of rehabilitation, and it was kind of like the universe sort of hitting the pause button, as it were, just saying, well, you got a bit of time to reflect here, and where to next? You got to stop right now. So, and it's often when you don't stop and you just keep going, you just kind of going through the motions that you lose the bigger perspective sometimes, because you just caught
and you
moment.
you tend to fill your time with other things, and therefore you just don't do it. I mean, that happened to me. I had a career in IT for many years, and that and children and family and whatever, that absorbed all my time, and there was very little time for doing anything creative.
Yeah, it was definitely a gift and a challenge from the universe, and that's well, I
Mm.
keep using the universe, whatever that means, life. And it was a very clear time for me to find the courage to step out full time, basically, and pull myself together and refine a few things and prepare a little bit. And pretty much from there, I think it was around 2008.
Yep.
I just sort of launched in, and no business training, which you'll find out pretty quickly. You can be the greatest artist in the world, but if you don't have a clue about business, good luck. Good luck putting food on the table. So I won't lie. I'm more of an artist at heart than a businessman, and I'm more of a humanitarian than I am a bit concerned about making a dollar. And
So
I'm more concerned with filling my life with rich life experience than I am with security and stability. And I can do that, and it's been a very deliberate choice and a very considered choice and a very consistent choice. And I do that sort of most days of the week. And I can do that, to be fair, without having mouths to feed and a huge mortgage somewhere. Again, that's semi-deliberate. So I'm not suggesting that people are less courageous for not doing that. In fact, if I was encouraging someone to get into photography now, I'd say maybe don't do that. I would say ease in and move into a part-time model, because relying on it for income is a little bit stressful and maybe not the right time in the culture of photography to do that, arguably.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but well, that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, and so I'm quite diverse in what I do. As much as landscape photography was everything to me for decades, I through that process of wilderness therapy, where I started weaving people into my images and relationship with country, through my building up of relationship with Indigenous people as well. I started doing a lot more portrait and event sort of work.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked as an international high-end music festival photographer. I've done exhibitions of fine art nudes. I've worked in corporate architectural photography. I do a lot of aerial work. I'm a professional drone pilot. And probably the biggest body of work that I have in the world is actually a 22-year long photo documentary portrait project on men in Australia. So
Yep.
so my approach is very diverse. I thrive on diversity. I love the challenge and the creative inspiration it gives me to bounce off different genres. I've done a talking landscape photography show where I can reach out to my heroes and all people I want to learn from and get them on the show.
Yep.
I do a lot of exhibition work. I've learned how to print really well. I've done a lot of training in my time with people like Les Walkling, who's one of the greatest photographic minds in Australia. I run workshops all around the world. I judge all around the world. So I've really diversified my relationship with the wider conversation of visual artistry in different forms. And I've slowly, from being self-taught, I haven't sort of done a lot of workshops and training necessarily, but by judging around Australia and going and launching into different projects with different people, I've learned a lot and grown a lot through the community of photography that started building around me by
Mm.
joining bigger organizations and organizations with higher purpose that have lots of different professionals and different mediums, and it's a very healthy realm to grow as an artist.
Yeah. I think you're quite right. That diversity, and I mean, whilst I'm largely a landscape photographer myself, and it's something that really does float my boat. As you say, putting food on the table. There's also real estate photography and other commercial ventures that I'm into, simply because I know that trying to sell prints of my landscape photography is never going to put food on the table. So
Yeah, like I've worked at being on the current 7-time professional landscape photographer of the year in Tasmania, but I'm also the current and 4-time commercial photographer of the year in Tasmania.
yeah,
So it's and that was important to me from a strategically, I guess, from a food on the table point of view, to be able to present different hats.
yeah, yeah,
And I think it's there are people that can purely survive on landscape photography, and I'd say that's still a huge part of what I do, and it always will
Yeah,
be.
sure.
And probably the beating heart of what I'm most passionate about. Um, but I've gained a lot, and different genres have often given me opportunities that have cross pollinated and build up my skill sets and the way I see and the way I relate to things, and what equipment I've had access to, and what places I've been able to reach. So I don't feel like anything is really separated from others. To me personally, they all kind of weave through each other quite well.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and I guess that was sort of part of my point, is that you build up those layers of skills
Mm.
that make what you are passionate about better. You know, you might be doing something over in portrait world which teaches you something about how light reacts to certain surfaces, even though they're
Exactly.
not in the, they're not in the natural landscape. But then when you go out, you're able to actually apply that to what you're looking at in the in nature. And I think, building that skill, stack, if you like, for want of a better term, is something that's very important for any photographer of any genre.
Yeah, agreed on all counts. And
Um,
that's quite a good
go
example too. You go.
I was going to move on to judging competitions. You mentioned that you've judged a few and also entered a few and won quite a number of awards. How important do you think it is to be entering competitions for a photographer?
Yeah, it's an interesting process as an evolving artist. Like, how much do you require or gain from external validation with your work?
Mm,
And we do that in small ways through the people around us and the feedback we get through our own social media channels and family and friends and exhibitions. And there's lots of different ways to get that sort of feedback. And to me, competition is only one of them. Or sales in a book or
sure,
that kind
sure.
of thing. But I think what I personally have found quite relevant about it for me is it's given me a consistent platform to keep pushing myself. So I joined the AIPP 14, 15 years ago, and I was totally solo. I knew no one and knew nothing about, didn't even know other photographers even existed where I lived. And all of a sudden I was in this community, and that was a big part of what I've grown from. But secondly,
Yeah,
I had this something to aim for every year, to push myself, to push the envelope, to experiment, to try new things, to learn how to print, to learn more about visual communication, to learn more about how to weave narrative into my images, to get more aware of the kind of level of what's out there and where I sat relative to the wider kind of community and their capacity and abilities and the way they see. To get more aware of sort of artistic trends and things as well, which can be useful even as a commercial photographer. And so if I didn't have that kind of annual push to go somewhere, I easily could have just toddled along. And I
yep,
don't think I would have evolved as quickly. I wouldn't have been as more critical or given as much of a critical eye over my work. I wouldn't have engaged in conversations with other people that to learn about visual literacy and communication within in the visual realm. By watching judging, I learned a huge amount. And arguably, I could say being on a judging panel, I probably learned more about photography than anywhere else in my life.
yeah, wow,
So I'm sitting on a panel with, four grandmasters, and I'm lucky enough to be called by myself now. And when I first started, I was sitting on a panel with four grandmasters, and I was usually the last one to speak because there's a little squeaky one on the corner. And the rules are you're not allowed to say anything that hasn't already been said about an image. So I had to sit there and try and come up with aspects of an image that hadn't been spoken to and no one had seen after four grandmasters had already spoken. And I'm just
yeah,
going, oh, God. So it really got me to dig deep and, to really listen. And I literally wrote notes sometimes after what I heard, the way somebody was describing an image. It's like, oh my God, I never thought of that. So I learned over a long period of time, 15 years of judging that, to look deeper, to look beyond the technical. The technical is kind of like the knock on the door part where you kind of,
it's the basics. You've got to have a technically good image for it to be even considered. I'd say.
particularly in, like a professional award structure, you need to prove you have that professional skill set first. But then,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that the conversation will naturally go there. Then what is it that defines an award-winning image? And I actually just wrote two books with Ignacio Palacios at the beginning of COVID,
Yep.
dissecting award-winning images. So I literally had half a year to dig under the surface of all these images and really conceptualize and put into sort of accessible literacy kind of what those qualities were. And it was quite a process. And, from a very simplistic point of view, the bedrocks of a great image is the design, the visual balance, the structure of an image, being very deliberate about what's actually supporting image and what's actually distracting from it.
Mm-hmm.
Not being afraid to go a bit bolder and simpler in your compositions, which require a lot of confidence, and maybe a bit more vision, to really lean into aspects of narrative and storytelling and emotion.
Yep.
And emotion can be a very subtle thing. It can be through the nuance of color. It can be with a very considered way you balance a color palette, which actually moves people around emotionally. I have a background in psychology, and so I've studied brain and cognition, and so I have a bit more of a deliberate understanding of how color influences how we relate to things and how it influences our emotional sphere. And people like Bill Henson, for instance, are masters of that kind of thing. They weave in unconscious misdirects with the color tones and shadows are actually the opposite of what they should be if you go in really close. But from far back, you can't tell. So your brain's got this sense of dissonance and discord and unrest, and you can't tell why. And he's literally using just subtle micro nuances of oppositional colors, like warm and cool tones in unexpected places to weave that through his images in really subtle ways. So you can be very cognitive about it, or you can be very sort of intuitive about it.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I guess, when you see a lot of images from judging, there's an element of originality that you're looking for in terms of the freshness of perspective and a different way something's been seen or looked at that you don't see from before. And homage is welcome and appreciated if it's done well. Homage being, a reference to other sort of artworks. When we do our judge training, we're often encouraged to look at other mediums, film, video, painting, sculpture, even, to just sort of keep wider conversations of what we can relate to in the visual realm, and what reaches and what touches people, and what communicates beyond the obvious, what asks questions of you, what challenges it. It's an image that I'm going to remember forever. Is it touched a chord in me? And yes, it's subjective. Like, certain images will just hit a chord in someone that hits a life experience that they've had, or a particular style or genre of work that really sings to them on a deeper level, or a homage to an artist that you might not even be aware of that your work represents. Like, it's a little bit hit and miss.
Yeah.
I think we're in the top 20%. It's kind of anyone's game from there.
Yeah.
In terms of what rises to the top, and that will probably always be the case, because it's artists judging art, essentially. So having a very considered panel makes a big difference. Mixing genres, mixing levels of experience, even getting people that are industry experts that aren't necessarily photographers in certain subjects really helps.
Yeah, definitely.
And people like the NZIPP and the WPPI and the AIPP, which I've judged all of which many times, are very deeply considered about their judging process and the training that the judges have, and the lineation and the design of the actual panel that's on at the time. But at the same time, it's a roll of the dice. It's putting skin in the game. There's a lot of courage and vulnerability in entering contests and putting your work out there publicly.
Yep.
And I don't think anyone is immune to that.
No, definitely.
And so that skin in the game, I think, is the very thing that drives you a little bit further, or to go a little bit farther, or to try something different, or to push the boundaries a little bit more. There's nothing like being judged by your peers in any sort of genre in the world, and that has a bit of an emotive quality to it. When you're in a judging room live, it can be pretty intense, I can tell you.
Yeah.
And then when you got cameras on you and it's streamed live around the world, and people are going to be like rewinding everything you say and dissecting it, it's like, oh, no pressure.
Yeah.
But it grown hugely, and I think it's important to be a little bit discerning and realistic about what contests you enter, because they have different cultures and different styles of photography that rise to the top. Some are very, I'm a huge advocate for the National Landscape Photography Awards, which have come out in the last few years, with Matt Payne and Tim Parkin and those sort of guys. And it's very clean imagery with minimal post production, and it's kind of, to me, letting nature be the hero again, and you're not having to compete with 10 million hours of refined Photoshop work from some absolute graphic artist expert that I wouldn't have a clue how to do myself.
Yeah, yeah,
Which I do appreciate, and I have judged many, many times, and I actually greatly respect in its own realm. And as a judge, you've got to put your own biases aside, to be a successful judge anyway.
yeah,
So yeah, so have a look at the competitions, look at the style of work that's in there. Is it really the ethics and values of what they stand for, something you want to support as well? Because your money is going towards supporting who they are and what they stand for as well. There's some competitions that feel a little bit like, well, they're not really offering any prizes or any feedback. It just feels a little bit like it's a business plan more than something back to the community. Whereas NLPA, like, that's year-long feedback all year round off their own bat. Very, very accessible pricing structure, wonderful prizes, excellent feedback, beautiful books, engaged YouTube panels reflecting on images. And they spend the whole year relating and sharing images that didn't win the prizes
yeah, yeah,
all year round. It's brilliant.
yeah,
Huge commitment from those guys. We've had
absolutely.
Tim Parkin on the show a few times because we have so much respect for what they're doing.
Mm, mm.
So local can be, I mean, it's the best place to start is local camera clubs by far. And it's a wonderful platform to just push you every time. All right, I will go and print something up for the first time, or I'll go to somebody else and get some feedback with these 10 images and try to whittle it down to 4, or I'll challenge myself to work on the theme for this month, which gets me thinking in a way I otherwise wouldn't apply myself. So they're all avenues for growth. But because there's skin in the game, and you may not like the feedback, you can get a bit banged around by the process if you have a bit too much sort of ego in the way, and
Yeah.
which we all do. We're artists, and let's not kid ourselves. It's very human.
Well, you spend hours out there in the field and hours in the editing studio, and it's your baby, and nobody likes their baby being
Oh,
criticised, do they?
oh, you know it so well, Grant. But it's funny. You've got to remember, and this is where it gets tricky. Those judges are going to have no idea how much blood, sweat, and tears went in,
Exactly. Yeah.
and they'll never know. And it's actually not relevant to the
No.
conversation about the image, even though it is to you.
Yeah.
And that's where it can get a little bit cold. The colder side of judging can come in. It's like they don't know. I wouldn't say they don't care, but at the same time, it's not part of the conversation.
Well, when you've got 2 or 3 thousand entries in a competition, it can be and some of the bigger ones have got upwards of 10,000. You haven't got the time to care that much about it, I guess, in a judging panel to say, all right, well, it comes down to, do I like this enough to put it up into the next round of judging or not? And you start to see that culling process become fairly brutal, I'd say.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I've judged the international panoramic awards, and I think I've got 4,500 images to judge. So it's kind of like okay, well, here we go. Where are we going to start? And one of the ways that we create a level playing field is we'll do a walkthrough all the images first, so
Yeah.
you get a sense of it. You'll get a scale of reference, which I think is an important technique, and they do that a lot in the national on the national awards level. And I do that personally when I do a lot of I just judge the I think top emerging photography of the year awards. I think maybe the 10th, 11th time, just a week or two ago, and I just sit down the night before and I do a huge run through, and I don't judge anything.
Yeah.
And I let them sit in my subconscious overnight. And it's funny, when I wake up, certain images will rise to the fore a little bit, or reinforce themselves, or because allowing an image a little bit of time to assimilate with you can allow more unconscious sort of elements of the image to rise to the fore.
Yeah, definitely.
Whereas in that live judging process, you've got 60 seconds
Yeah.
and that's it. And you have to hope, and the artist has to hope, especially, that if you've got some more subtle or hidden elements, or that need a little bit of time and don't have a screaming loud voice, but are still very present, that the judges have enough space and capacity to relate to that. And sometimes it's a little bit quick. I won't lie, over 15 years, there's still 2 or 3 where I'm like, damn it, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
That's what a panel's for, because somebody else might pointed out to
Well,
you and
this is it, yeah. And
that.
I think the diversity of the panel and the panel's views, and not just their skills and so forth, but their own sort of, everyone has their own personal biases, and some people will like a calmer, more serene image. Other people like something that's more impactful, and you end up, I guess, getting that blend of all of the voices that are on the panel.
Well, I think it's different. Like there's a lot of most of the competitions are online, and there's not necessarily any interaction between the judges at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And what I feel like are the most beneficial competitions to engage with from an educational point of view, it's the live ones.
Mm.
The NZIPP, the WPI, and what was the AIPP, which they've now evolved, and they've got the Australian Photographic Prize, which I judged last year, and I was really happy to support. And that's a lot of the similar kind of caliber and level and style of live judging. And when you have a panel of live judges that are ready and willing and capable of challenging each other live, it's incredible the kind of conversations and knowledge that can come out of those.
Yeah, yeah.
That's where I've probably learned the most in the last 10 or 15 years is, having straight out, debates and arguments with photographers about live images, in the moment, with that intensity of environment and that intent and purposefulness around it and a very considered judging process around it. It's super powerful, and it's an incredible resource for all of us. And I know NZIPP will be coming up again soon, and they've committed, as they always have for years, to doing a live recorded process, so you can actually access those.
Yeah, right.
Very, very sadly, when the IPP went down, the decade or more of recorded events are now no longer accessible, is my understanding. Which
Oh, wow.
to me is one of the great modern resources in Australian photography. To be honest,
Absolutely.
simple as that.
That blows me away that's disappeared.
But it's, well, I mean, actually, I mean, literally mean the recorded judging process specifically. And then there's a whole other conversation about the industry impact from that organization no longer being there as well. That's more again. But I couldn't think of a more tangible, accessible, modern resource that I could say you learn more from than that live judging process,
Yeah.
and reliving and watching that. And you'll find that if you're brave enough to have a go yourself, you pay way more attention and you're way more focused, and you're probably going to learn more.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
more invested in it, and
Absolutely.
you're not just playing along the side while you're doing something else. You're actually like, whoa, I'm right here, and
Yeah.
it's pretty damn exciting. So I've judged every awards in Australia multiple times around every state because I just love that process so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on a personal note, I've made friends all around the country. I've got places to stay all around the country. I've made mentors. I've started projects. I've borrowed equipment. I've, done business referrals. It's been a huge investment in my career, even though the judging itself is completely unpaid. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a love thing to do, but over all those years, I did a trip around Australia last year before, like a post-COVID run around. I was going insane. And I stayed with photographers and flew with photographers all around Australia in every state. And I don't think I even stayed in a hotel once, and like on a 6-week
Wow.
trip.
Yeah.
That's just from people I'd met going around judging. So, the investment sort of comes back in different ways, shall we say?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. There was that case recently where an AI generated image won a competition. Admittedly, it wasn't any great shakes as a competition. I think it was a fairly regularly held weekly, sort of best photo sort of thing. And the artist apparently entered it to sort of prove a point rather than anything else. Do you see AI as being a threat to that photography judging and the impact on, I guess, being able to even blending a real photo with AI elements, etc.? Do you see that becoming something that's going to be more prevalent and harder to detect and harder to become sort of part of that judging process?
Yes and no. Like there's already, for the major competitions, there's already structures in place to get around that. So, there was some pretty big controversy like 5-ish years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, where an Australian photographer who was a really high composite photographer, and her work's incredible, to be honest. And To be honest, I'm not quite sure why she did it because her work was already so amazing. But
Yeah, yeah,
she broke the rules by including a lot of clip art in her images because the rule was you had to physically photograph everything yourself. But she might have had 100 elements in a single photograph, so it probably just saved her a lot of time. But even though she was physically way more than capable to do it herself, just time wise, it might have come in and she got
yeah,
caught out, and that rippled through a lot of competitions around the world that she'd entered for many years,
mm,
and that did have a very, very big ruffle around the international contest circuit. And it basically meant that most competitions of a certain caliber will require raw files for their winners at the very least.
yep,
It may be an issue, I think, if they don't make it to the winner's circle, but they do all right. If they haven't done the raw vetting on the every single image, which is a huge, huge, um, very significant undertaking to do, especially if you've got thousands of images.
absolutely.
So maybe, but I don't think the ones that get to the top will get away with that. I think a lot of the competitions have raw file vetting, and that's basically to discourage people from doing it in the first place. But it's also a very clear avenue to realize when images have been created.
Yeah, yeah,
So I don't think there's yet capacity to get around that. And so I think it might move into its own realm where they'll actually start AI competitions themselves.
Oh, I don't doubt that. I think there are already AI competitions, or if not that, composite competitions already in place.
Where I see, I mean, that's a very emotionally evocative word that you use, threat, but where I might relate it to a little bit that way is as a working professional,
Yeah,
as a working commercial professional photographer. Like already architectural and car photography and things like that are pretty much already gone anyway to
yeah,
CGI and other aspects. And to see portraiture work and other sorts of things moving into that realm is like, oh my goodness, what's that going to mean to me as a working photographer?
mm, mm,
So it's almost sort of got me thinking a little bit more about moving back into my skill sets and portraiture and event work and music and even wedding work. I don't advertise weddings, I never have, but I don't get shy if somebody in California asks me to come over and shoot their wedding. I,
sure,
I do a bunch of international weddings, maybe a few a year, and I love it. And people that I love or care about as well, and I'm pretty good at it. But it's sort of I'm trying to think, geez, do I need to be a little bit more discerning in my future about leaning my I guess commercial sort of work in a direction that is going to remain viable in and around the future of AI.
mm, mm,
I think it's happening way too fast for us to see where it's going and how it's going to impact things. Luke and I have had a number of discussions that we need to have multiple panel sessions this year on the Talking Landscape Photography Show about it, because I think it's the most significant element of photography that exists in the world right now in the upcoming
yeah,
future.
yeah,
It's the most controversial and sort of unknown and potentially impactful thing that's reached the photography world since the invention of digital photography in the first place.
definitely. Yeah,
So it's a little bit unfathomable for me at the moment how far it's going to go and
yeah,
how rapidly the feedback loop on those mechanisms of algorithms are increasing to, first ones are, oh, the hands are funny or they don't do eyes right. Next thing you know, they fix that, they fix that, they fix that. It's just insane. And some of my photographic friends have been making a point of doing thematic projects deliberately and getting them as close as possible to what they physically could have photographed to almost fool people and just saying, oh, by the way, this is AI and just freaking people out. So
yeah, yeah. I think
yeah, what are
that,
your thoughts, Grant?
well, in terms of where it's going, as you say, I think it's moving really fast. I think it'll continue to move fast, and to be honest, uh, I think it will probably move much faster as time goes on as well, which may seem strange, but I just think the way that the code can be built and then modified and remodified, learning based off what the system is actually seeing and what it's being asked to do, it will actually evolve far faster than anything a set of human programmers could actually sit down and type in. So I think that side of things is going to evolve very quickly. But in terms of commercial work, I do see some threats. I was talking to somebody the other week about the fact that a creative director now could just simply type in a few words and get their product shot without having to go and hire a model, hire a location, go through all the bibs and bobs that go along with actually creating a commercial shoot. And then they could then hone and change and adjust the campaign. And to be honest, I can see a situation in the advertising world, having had a little bit to do with that in the past, that there will be greater automation in that, and it will actually adjust the imagery and so forth based on audience reactions. And that'll be down to the number of eyeballs, where the eyeballs are tracking on the screen, what the how long the eyeballs are looking at particular areas on the screen, and various elements will actually change and evolve through a campaign automatically without any human intervention. So I can see a future where that kind of thing is where it will not necessarily end up, because I don't think that's an end state. I think that's a progression that will continue. The challenge for commercial photographers, obviously, is how do you adjust your business model when that threat is sitting there on your doorstep. And one way of doing it is you could become very good at being an AI creative developer, if you like, for want of a better term.
There'll be a few new buzzwords, I'm sure.
Yeah.
To find that role. I think for me, from an artistic and purely photographic point of view, Grant, there's a lot of murky ethics floating around.
Oh, absolutely. And it's to me, it's that ethical. Is this real? Is this synthetic? Is going to be where there's going to be a lot of argument, a lot of conversation, because
copyright and artistic integrity is
exactly
right at the beating heart of that, because these algorithms are basically reaching into and following just a huge variety of work that already exists.
Correct.
And that's how they're creating from. So there's actually a piece of a lot of people's work inside all of these and references to it all. So what does that mean for copyright infringement? And
well, one of the really challenging things, I think, will be where an artist, and that could be any kind of visual artist, except even maybe sculpture, because I can see this moving into 3D printing as well. So watch out for that space too. But I could see, or there is already the issue that somebody could say, all right, well, I want to create an image of Tasmanian landscape that's in the style of Paul Hoelen. And therefore, I create an image through typing a few words, and it looks a hell of a lot like what you're doing.
Oh my God, you almost got me curious to try that now. So what's it going to come up with? I'm a little bit curious.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you don't know what is. And the other thing ethically, I think, that a lot of people don't look at is, taking credit for what's effectively a machine doing all the work, or a set of programmers that did the original kickoff of that AI process. It's really their work, as far as I'm concerned.
Or the artist that they're referencing.
Well, yes, and the artists that they're referencing, and the works that are being referenced to actually provide the structure on which the synthetic images are being created. So I think there's a lot of murk around that ethical question. I certainly wouldn't take any credit if I go and use Midjourney version 5 today and created an image. I'd say, yes, well, the machine created an image. All I've done is type some words, and yes, I might be very clever about how I've done that. And yes, I might choose that word. And where it becomes murkier is, okay, well, I pull that image down and I then use Photoshop and I use my own skills to hone it, refine it, and alter it, and even add to it. Then that becomes partly my work, partly the machine's work. So, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of murkiness to, plow through there. I don't know that there's a lot of conversations going on around it yet. I think there should be, particularly, I guess, in the more I guess, visual arts community as opposed to just photography, because I don't think it just affects photography. It affects all visual arts, artists, because, you could say, all right, we'll do it in the style of Rembrandt or, some other contemporary famous painter, and it'll give you something that looks a bit like a Rembrandt or whoever it is that you've referenced.
Watch this space.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's gonna be interesting, and as I said, I think it'll evolve a lot quicker than people are expecting it to, and it will continue to speed up. I don't think it's going to slow down. Yeah, I know it's a bit of a joke. I for one, you know, praise our robot overlords. Well, I think that day could be coming.
Oh God. No comment on robot overlords.
Anyway, let's get back to photography, real photography, and talk a little bit about uh, how where you live influences how you shoot. I know it influences what you shoot because it's obviously the Tasmanian wilderness that gets you going. Does it influence how you shoot in any way?
Yeah, I feel like what I spoke of earlier exactly overlaid to that question. So how I shoot is heavily influenced by the culture of landscape photography that exists here in Tasmania. So
Yeah.
I literally had Grant Dixon sitting in my house having a cup of tea just 5 minutes before I came on with you. Actually, 1 minute before, and being around people like that and a culture like that, and the intentionality with how and why they shoot the way they do, and the ethical, I guess, purposefulness of how they try and let the landscape be the hero rather than the artist,
Mm.
is still very woven into photography here. And I remember, if Peter doesn't mind me using an example, Peter Eastway came and did a photo of Cradle Mountain, and he stretched the mountain in it.
Yep.
He liked to look better. And you should have seen the uproar that went around from the local Tasmanian photographers. You wouldn't believe it. And Peter's just being the artist that he is, and that's more of a reflection of the Tasmanian culture than it is about Peter.
Sure.
That's an example of how where I live shapes kind of the style of work that I produce. It's probably kept my work far away from the composite sort of realm personally, and a lot more on a focusing on camera craft sort of level.
Yep.
And I feel like the younger generations are learning post production before or even at the cost of actual traditional camera craft.
Mm.
And
Mm.
as much as you could say that's a bad thing, I think that's just how it is, and it's maybe even too late to complain about that. But it's something to be present and aware to, in terms of how the newer generation is relating to their capacity and their technique and style of approaching photography in general. So that would be a really simple way to say why here. I think also it's a very elemental place living here. It changes every day. It can snow. It would literally snow on the mountain 4 days ago, straight up my window, and in the middle of summer. So that impacts the fact and that nature rules here.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't go out and put myself on nature. I go out and try and survive it. I try and be ready for anything because I really don't know on any given day of the week or any time of the year what's going to be thrown at me. Even when I plan a trip and look at the weather, if it's a multi-day trip, good luck knowing what's going to happen on day 3. You just can't tell in Tasmania. So that
Yeah.
shapes, I guess, the level of preparedness and the level of flexibility that I have in terms of what I'm going out to try and shoot. And maybe it introduces a bit of fluidity as well. I don't get too caught up in exact outcomes because it's rare that everything will line up perfectly just how you want it. You need to be able to sort of roll with the punches, as it were, with what nature offers down here.
Yeah. Right.
And I personally think that's a good thing. And I think it's also, from a very global point of view, it's a good thing to relate to the natural world as being the boss, which we don't kind of do that much when you live in a city and work in a car and an air conditioned office and drive back on a motorway and live in an apartment block. The natural world isn't a big part of your life, and so no wonder you're not really thinking about it that much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas Tassie doesn't let you do that. It's like it'll let you know pretty quickly, if you're getting off the bandwagon with it being the boss here. And even when you look at the way a city like Hobart that I live in is, I live on the side of a mountain.
Yep.
So that shapes how I live, and that any time of the year I can go up and I can get snow and I can be in complete alpine conditions, and I can be trying to stand up 110-kilometer-hour winds, and I can experience what it's like to be in the Arctic, and I can see huge ranges and flora, and I got wildlife running through the back of my property, which literally every day. So where I live is a huge shaping force. I'm quite aware if somebody's having a smoke, I might be a little bit cheeky sometime and say, guess what's on the other side of that smoke? And I'm like, what? And I look over there and I say, oh, the cleanest air in the world. And it literally is. It is the cleanest air on planet Earth. And the west coast of Tasmania, if you stand in the middle of it and look west, it's the largest, longest, untracked piece of vision on the planet. You literally, if you followed a straight line, you'd go past South America all the way to Africa.
Yeah,
so it's the largest sort of untracked stretch of ocean in the world. And that's why it gets so hammered by whatever comes along, and why it doesn't have its own landmass to dictate and change the weather systems that much. And so it sort of requires you to take a step back and just to be ready to accommodate whatever comes, as opposed to putting your own will on the landscape.
Yeah, fantastic. What's your most memorable photographic experience?
Oh, I'll let you know when the book comes out there, my friend. I would not know how to answer that in a million years. I could answer that in an obtuse sort of way. So I created an image in about 2007 that I didn't even remember that I created. And when I was entering my very first competition in the AIPP, I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know how to print, didn't know anything. And I had a couple of friends on my shoulder, and I said, oh, and I was just running through some random images. I said, oh, what about that one? And I was like, really, that one's a bit weird. And I thought, and I didn't know any better, so I chucked it in. And it won the highest scoring print in Tasmania. And it went on to almost win the highest scoring print in Australia, actually, that year. It was winning the first 2.5 days. And then, God bless them, a lovely wedding photograph beat me to get photograph of the year. But it changed my career. And it was actually a photograph that I took at the Burning Man Festival in the Nevada desert.
Okay, yep.
And it was a very, very Mad Max-like, deep sort of black, golden silhouette of an art structure out in the open, expansive desert. And it had all these different intricate little micro stories of people and things going on and around it. It looked like nothing you'd come across in everyday life whatsoever. And it was a very deeply memorable photograph to a lot of people. And the fact that I find it really interesting that I actually can't remember taking that photograph. I don't think I slept for 3 days.
Yeah, wow.
Stumbling around trying to find my way back from this crazy like life experience that Burning Man is. Look it up if you don't know much about it. It's hard to describe and put into words. It's a 7-day leave no trace festival.
Yep.
With no money involved. You're in the middle of the desert in the hottest month of the year. There's no food, there's no water. It's a survival experience to some extent. It's 37 degrees during the day and windstorms coming through at 60, 100 kilometers an hour, blowing camps apart. It's just, and at nighttime, it turns into this incredible event that you can't even put into words. And
a lot of crazy stuff going on.
Yeah, but to photograph, it's incredible. Like it really is. It's like Mad Max on steroids. And so I guess that's an interesting story that one of my most powerful photographs in my career, I don't actually remember taking, because I was so deeply immersed in being there, it almost didn't matter. And I think I didn't even know what I was doing back in those days, and I shot it as a JPEG too, which probably didn't help. But it was so impactful just by its nature and its structure and its kind of spontaneous kind of sense of point of difference that it really stood out. And it opened a lot of doors for me. Like people were literally, I remember going up there and I was so scared. I went up to Sydney to the big national AIPP awards, didn't know anybody. And I was so nervous to go in there. I actually walked around the block for like 2.5 hours before I even went in. And when I went in, the one guy that I knew, his name was Alan Moyle, and I only knew him a little bit. And he looked at me funny and he said, follow me. And he walked me into the room and he looked up on the wall and said, that's your image, isn't it? And I said, yeah. He said, well, that's currently the highest scoring image in Australia. And I was just about feeling, I just broke down into tears. I was like, you're kidding me, like this. Yeah. And all these people came around and like, who's this guy? And what's going on here? Next thing you know, I'm out to dinner with Christian Fletcher and Tony Hewitt and all these guys I never even heard of and didn't know who they were. So it kind of just put me on this radar and opened up this conversation with the community who were curious who this newcomer was. And having never been around other photographers till literally that year, it was a game changer for me. So it's funny how a single photograph in your life can sometimes make such a difference.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
might not be in an expected way. It might not even be a planned photograph. Right place, right time, right intent, and a lucky audience. And it's like that in modern days with social media. You can just create one image, and in days it can be a worldwide sensation. Like, when was that possible in film days? Good luck with that.
yeah. That's right. That's right.
Whereas any kid with a smartphone, that could possibly be the case. And I literally had that conversation last week. I work with schools doing wilderness therapy camps using photography as a medium for them to connect with their country and to take ownership of the kind of conversations they want to have with their relationship with it, and to share that with the world through imagery. And all of them only have phones. Not a single one of them has a camera. Even on a 3 or 4 day wilderness trip, nobody even knows what a DSLR is. So I've just got to lean into the reality of what is, and that's a little bit challenging at times, but it's also rolling with the times with the younger generation.
Yeah, fantastic. What about horror stories? Have you got any of those?
Oh, seriously, you could do a whole show, Grant. Like, I'm a little bit renowned for my horror stories, mate, to be honest. To sum up it too really quickly, I went to Yosemite National Park. I just got a one-way ticket to America. My mother's actually from Memphis, Tennessee, and my sister was in San Fran getting married, and I just decided, I packed everything up and just got a one-way ticket. Said, all right, I'm going to go embrace my American heritage and have a good look around. And the first thing I did was go to Yosemite. And I remember the first night I got there, I was camping out in the car park, and suddenly at 1 in the morning, sure, you got to move your tent right now. I was like, what? It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Who's this guy? And so I pack up my tent and I've got to push it over a bridge. And next thing you know, I hear this huge gunshot coming around the valley. And it was summer. It was a really old, aggressive bear that was starving. It was coming down out of the country, and it had come in down 5 or 6 times, and they worried it was going to eat someone. So that was my first taste of bears, and I had to wait to go back country because I didn't realize I'd never been somewhere you had to have permits and had to wait days to go for a bushwalk. I was like, this is like 2007. I was like, you're kidding me,
Yep.
mate.
Yep.
I got a 2 day permit, and of course, I ended up being out there for about 9 days because it's like, once I'm out there, what are they going to do about it? But I only had a few days worth of food, so I was running around borrowing muesli bars on people for taking photos. And anyway, I ended up climbing Half Dome and coming back down, and then I sort of did a little bit sneaky, which I probably shouldn't say online, but I camped somewhere on a rock ledge up high, which you're probably not meant to do. I don't think I knew it at the time, but I know now you're not. And I put all my food out and away from me, and I went to sleep, but I was a bit nervous because I was out alone. I was up pretty high, and sure enough, about midnight, I started hearing this crunching and rustling, and I was like,
Yeah.
uh-oh. And I just carefully opened the door, and I saw this massive silhouette of this huge bear, and I'm like, oh my God, nobody knows I'm here. I got no phone. I'm up here on my own. Crawl back into my tent, and then it came right up, and its face started pressing into the side of my tent,
Oh
like
wow.
straight into my face, sniffing around. I'm like, oh my God. And then it came around and started coming inside my tent. And I'm like, this is getting really serious. And then it grabbed my bag, and then I realized, wait a minute, that's my camera bag. Stuff that. It's not taking my camera gear. That's not insured. And I just manned up, and I got my torch and I got my walking stick, and I just ripped open the door and just went, roar, and right in his face. And it just went, roar, and it ran off with my camera bag, and I chased it. While I had the upper hand. This is the stupidest thing I've probably ever done. So I was chasing this bear through the bush, and then it's my camera bag's just bouncing along, and then it ends up getting the bag caught in a tree, a little shrub down the bottom. It's just going, and then it rips off the bottom of the bag and it runs off. And
Wow.
I kept that camera bag for about 3 years without holding it, so I could tell a story. But I started losing way too much stuff out of the hole, so I ended up getting it repaired. Good old Kiwi MacPack. So it's one of many, Grant. One of many.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. How do you push through creative blocks and overcome challenges in your photography? And what sort of things do you do to stay inspired and engaged?
To be honest, I really have them.
Mm.
I love what I
Yeah.
do so much. It just weaves through everything. That being said, I'm quite conscious about that. And I think it's because I've been conscious about that, I haven't found myself in a position where I get stuck. So I've made a lot of deliberate choices in my life where I generally only work for people and do things that I find meaningful and purposeful and are somehow making the world a better place. That's my overriding motto. If
Yep.
it's not somehow, making the world a better place when I started doing it, then why am I doing this? So you won't find me, doing a studio shoot with Coke bottles or something like that, but you will find me, getting a bag of rice and working on a humanitarian project somewhere for
Sure.
nothing because I believe in what they're doing, and I'm in that unique position to do that. So I guess meaningfulness and purpose in your work and why you're doing what you're doing and who you're engaging with in the wider community is a really key aspect when you get a bit stuck. Because if it's just for you and just a pat on the back in your own ego, then that can get pretty old pretty fast. And you can get pretty caught up in your need for external validation around that. Whereas if you're working for a project that's bigger than you, that doesn't really happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
My other deliberateness around keeping fresh is the variety and the scope of the breadth of genres that I engage with. As I said earlier in the show, that really does keep you fresh. It keeps you on edge. It keeps the cross pollination of ideas and techniques weaving across different things. I'm not afraid to have a go at new things. Being a part of a wider community of photographers has made a huge difference. Being a part of the Light Collective has been a massive influence. Running my Talking Long Landscape Photography show and reaching out to my heroes and people in the world that I really want to learn from and are inspired by. Actively engaging in competitions and pushing myself keeps things fresh. Sometimes I'm not in that space and I force myself to do it.
Yep.
And that's partly that it can be a good thing. Because often it can be very easy to go, oh, it's all too hard and not bother. But if you're committing to something, whether you want to or not, you find yourself grow in surprising ways. So that'll be a few techniques, Grant.
Okay, cool. What do you like to do when you're not out shooting?
Well, I'm an outdoorsman. I've been riding waves since I was 7 years old. I was a South Island champion in 1993 or something. I mountain bike. I climb a little bit. I cave a little bit. I sea kite quite a lot. I read quite a bit. I love films. I love music. I love good food. I love travel. Travel will be one of the great sort of loves of my life, and it's been quite interesting to be restricted internationally, and now I find it. The conversation is becoming a little bit more difficult. My next trip is Svalbard and Iceland, and in between that, I literally are just planning right now and today and this morning and last night actually, and it's sort of I'm very conscious of that carbon footprint, mate, and I'm struggling with it a little bit, and it's sort of like, well, how can I be a part of a conversation around climate change or support a project by doing it? Like, it's very rarely that I'll take on something, like I do a lot of aerial photography, but if you look at what I've done with it, so much of it is around conservation focus. I've done huge exhibitions on like one's called Altered Lands, where I've researched and photographed a lot of the big sort of mining and resource extraction processes in Australia and brought them to light. So yes, I'm in a small plane using fuel, but at the same time, I'm bringing awareness to the masses about the impact of fossil fuel extraction in the first place. So it's a bit of a come forth and come back sort of thing. So yeah, I love people. I love people watching. I just sort of love life, mate, to be honest. And I think living in a place like Tasmania where I'm not sort of caught up in a rat race, as it were, I have this breathing room and space to just be to some extent. I'm not just constantly just trying to make enough money to survive. That's a very deliberate choice for me, and it gives space and room for other things in my life to have a place. I'm not just exhausted at the end of the day, just getting up working for the man. Who I may not sort of be aligned with in terms of my values and ethics. And I think my moral compass is pretty strong. And as much as that can be a bit of a principled place to come from, it can really help your well-being as well when you're doing things that are well aligned with with values and your ethics. Because things just sit well and they sit easily and they feel good. And I think your working environment, if you're not aware of it already, is probably arguably the biggest impact on your mental health on day-to-day life. And if you're in a toxic work environment, you've got to have a pretty good look at what's keeping you there. And as much as it might be putting food on the table, it might be eating away at other aspects of your well-being that are going to come back and bite you. either soon or later in life. So I'm quite aware of those sort of things and have been from a young age. So I've lived a very deliberate life in terms of aligning with things that I feel are very meaningful and purposeful, and supportive of good things happening in the world. And that compass has led me to some amazing places. You might not want my retirement plan, but you probably would want my memory banks.
Fair enough. I've only got a couple more questions for you. Are there any photographers out there you think I should have on the podcast? I know you've probably got a long list. I've already got a long list. Just give me a couple.
David Thompson.
Yep.
From the US. In fact, I just spent 2.5 hours on the phone with him last night, actually,
Yep.
helping plan the Iceland part of my trip. I haven't heard much from Mark Animus. I feel like even though his work is very not fantastical, but it has that kind of dreamlike sort of aspect to it that almost transcends reality to me. I find it incredibly artfully done, and the fact that he's so committed to getting to really pretty extreme remote places, I have a huge admiration for. Maybe someone like Rob Blakers, whose life is dedicated to conservation-based photography, and he's literally 40, 50 years of his life, or at least 45, has been purely sort of run along those sort of lines. Sort of think Tim Parkin's an amazing man,
Yeah.
as well as a great photographer, and his understanding of the wider aspects of photography in the industry, his commitment to traditional camera craft, as well as his open-mindedness to the future photography, and his finger on the pulse across so much of what's happening around the world is pretty exceptional. And I really dearly love his commitment to the NLPA sort of values and ethics and ethos around that whole competition and what it stands for. There are a few that come to mind on a very, very short space of time.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Well, my last question is one that I've been trying to get to the bottom of right throughout the whole series of this podcast. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
I wouldn't go without it, mate.
Fair enough.
I don't know how people, I don't know what the argument is or what's wrong with people. The more the better. Put half a can on there, mate.
Good on you.
Wasn't expecting that one.
No, I know. That's why it's thrown in.
Great way to finish.
All right. Well, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to me, Paul. Where can people find your work?
I have a very old functioning website called paulhoelen.com, so don't look too deep. But if you want to reference some of my older work, that's a pretty good starting point. My Instagram at Paul Hoelen is very fresh and modern, but it's very, very focused on fine art, landscape, aerial photography in particular. It's a bit of a boutique sort of site, but that is easily one of my favorite genres, and we didn't even really talk about that much on the show. But it's probably, out of all the genres of landscape photography, it'd be what I'm probably most passionate about, to be honest. And
Sure.
you'll get a real sense of maybe why. And in Australia, we're living in one of the greatest countries in the world for aerial photography by far.
Totally. Yeah.
And all the places I've been in the world, it's right up there. And we have a lot of the greatest aerial photographers in the world as well. And I spent a lot of time sort of bouncing off them and traveling with them and shooting with them as well. It's a big, beautiful, rich part of my life. I'm reasonably active on Facebook, so I'm probably a little bit more diverse with what I put on there in terms of the type and style and work that I do. I'm moving into a lot more sort of critique-based sort of work and one-on-one sort of work with people as well. I've just been doing that directly so far. I've been trying to build a new website for about 12 years now, so stay tuned for the next one. And I
know what it's like. I'm in the middle of rebuilding mine, and it's taken way longer than I'd like.
It's tricky for me because I shoot so many different genres. How do you represent yourself in a way that does it justice without overcrowding people or being a bit too much?
Sure.
And anyway, it's a whole other conversation, but that's been my a resting point for some time. So be patient with me, everyone.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much again, Paul. It's been wonderful getting to know you better and learning a lot more about you. So thanks very much.
Well, real privilege to be. I had a look at your list of guests before I came on the show, and goodness me, my friend, you've got some incredible people and human beings and artists sort of mixed through there. So a real privilege to be somewhere on the list. And yeah, you're in the high 80s. I can relate to that length. We're up to 104 for our next show. I
Yeah,
know what it
this
means
is
to be that committed.
number 90 for me.
90. Wow. So we're I know what it means to be that committed and for that length of time. So I can speak from a space of deep understanding with honoring the significance of the commitment you've made to the wider community, Grant. So thank you, sir.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Paul. Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com. I'm also on Vero, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.